Good evening. There is yet another brutal cycle of violence in Israel and the occupied West Bank. It is a story you may well feel you've heard before. A Palestinian attack on Israeli civilians and a response described, at least by Palestinians, as disproportionate or even collective punishment. But here's what's different this time. That Israeli response has come not from the Israeli army, but from Israeli civilians, settlers in the West Bank, who took it upon themselves to seek revenge for the murder of two of their own, heading to a Palestinian village to torch homes and cars. The accusation as well, the Israeli army did little to stop what unfolded. Tonight on the France 24 debate, is it too late to break the latest cycle of violence? How much responsibility can be placed with Benjamin Netanyahu and the most far-right government in Israel's history? And is the region now on the brink of the third Palestinian intifada? Our panel tonight in the studio, the Franco-Israeli journalist Gil Mihaly. Thank you very much indeed, sir, for coming in. On the other side of the table, Mark Lefebvre, a member of the left-wing Israeli party Meretz. Thanks to you as well for coming in, sir. Joining us as well from Ramallah is Noor O'Day. She's an analyst and a former spokesperson for the Palestinian Authority. Welcome to you as well.
Thank you for having me.
So we clearly have much to discuss, but let's start then by having a closer look at what has unfolded.
Blocking off all entrance points to Jericho, Israeli security forces set up a checkpoint and searched cars on Tuesday, with motorists forming a long queue outside the West Bank city.
Who can stay sitting inside a car for 6 hours in this heat? There are women, elderly and sick people. There's no humanity. This isn't fair.
The Israeli army is searching for suspected Palestinian gunmen whom it has blamed for an attack on an Israeli-American man. The 27-year-old was killed while driving near Jericho on Monday night. It's the latest bloodshed in a flare-up of violence in the occupied West Bank. 2 Israeli settlers were shot dead over the weekend, triggering a rampage in Huwara, where settlers burned dozens of homes and at least 100 cars. More than 350 Palestinians were injured in the riots, most suffering from tear gas inhalation. Also on Sunday, a Palestinian man was shot and killed in a village south of Jerusalem. Tensions are particularly high in the West Bank, where Israel continues to build settlements that are considered illegal by most of the international community. On Tuesday, during a visit to Germany, Israel's foreign minister said there were no plans to stop their construction.
Even the previous government, when there were even some Arab parties in the coalition, they also built in Judea and Samaria. So definitely we will continue to build there as well.
Sunday night's riots have drawn widespread condemnation, including from conservative Jewish groups. The 8 Israelis detained over the incident have all been released, though 3 of them remain under house arrest.
Well, let's talk about some of the scenes in that report. Let me go, first of all, if I can, to you, Gil Mihaly. Give us a sense of your reaction to what has unfolded in the last sort of 48 hours or so.
Well, first of all, it's outrageous and it's shameful, and it shouldn't have happened, of course. This is for what we can, we can't use any other words rather than a pogrom to describe what happened there. And unfortunately, there weren't more casualties, because I think that they meant to cause even more harm than they did. It's just unacceptable. Having said that, if you want to understand what's going on, the current wave of violence didn't start yesterday. It didn't start under Benjamin Netanyahu. Pressure is getting more and more, getting higher for the last few months, even a few years. Structurally, this is a generation that was born after the second intifada. The second intifada was a traumatism for the Palestinian society. For quite a long time in the West Bank, violence was not an option. But those who are responsible for the violence on the Palestinian side today were born after Arafat died, they didn't know the second intifada. The lessons, the collective lessons that were learned are completely strange to them. They are galvanized by what's happening on the Mount Temple, on the Esplanade de Mosque. Usually they have also personal grievances. They know someone who was killed by Israeli forces in previous incidents. And usually they're also young men with no future. They don't think that they have a future. And the fact, and what we see in the last few years is the coming of age of this generation that is looking for his way to do something about a situation that seems blocked and without a horizon.
A situation that feels blocked for them. Let's get the analysis then of Noor Odeh from Ramallah on that. I mean, at least on that, Noor Odeh, would you agree with the analysis that you just heard, that Palestinians in the West Bank feel pretty hopeless right now, and it seems that the only resort available to them is violence?
Well, I think I'm going to pick up on something that you said at the introduction, that there could be a third intifada. And the question is, why has there been a first and a second and possibly third intifada? Why have Palestinians been in a state of confrontation with their occupier for the better half of more than half for more than half a century? And the answer is quite simple. They don't want to be governed by Israel against their will. And so we can psychoanalyze these young men who are now at the forefront of the confrontation. But the truth of the matter is, this is a people who do not want to be brutalized, who do not want to be oppressed, and who do not want to be ruled against their will by a foreign military. And there will always be a reason to pick up a fight with the oppressor. That's true in Palestine. It's true everywhere else in the world. And we see that in other areas in the world. The difference, I think, in Palestine is that there's always an attempt to kind of explain it away or credit Palestinian, seeking vengeance for it, rather than say that this is an untenable situation. It has to end. Palestinians must be free, or else this will not stop. There is just no formula where people can be consistently and persistently oppressed and brutalized and without them fighting back.
We have been joined now on the line by Alon Pinkas. He joins us from Tel Aviv. He's an analyst and a diplomat there. I hope you heard some of the start of our debate there, and I wonder if you could pick up on what Noor Odeh was saying there in Ramallah. You know, she's saying for Palestinians in the West Bank, really the occupation needs to end if this cycle of violence is going to end. You're sitting in Tel Aviv tonight. Would you agree largely with at least that part of this argument?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question that it needs to end, but you have to understand something. It's been 9 years since there's been an active peace process, since Secretary of State John Kerry was here. There's essentially no peace process. And everyone is manipulating everyone, and everyone is lying to everyone, and everyone is deceiving everyone. And on the outside, there's a gullible world that keeps on mumbling the two-state solution, commitment to two-state solution, while both Israelis and Palestinians are dismissing the two-state solution as some kind of a impossible or not unviable possibility. Now, the U.S. has been disengaging in terms of its active mediation and involvement. And now what you have in it is a nationalistic, extremist government that in its basic guidelines essentially said there will not be a Palestinian state ever. The two-state solution is null and void. The Jewish people have an exclusive right to settle throughout the biblical land of Israel, which obviously includes the West Bank. And you see the Palestinians on the one side, and you see the Israelis on the other side, on top of which there is a constitutional and political crisis verging on a meltdown in Israel. And all of this is, it's like a crescendo. Now, the problem, and I think Gil Michaeli alluded to it earlier, is that there's no structure to this wave of violence on the Palestinian side. There's no organizational structure, and they have been radicalized by reality rather than by ideology. And in that respect, it is extraordinarily difficult to stem this tide of violence.
Indeed, and we will talk more about the violence coming from the Palestinian side during this programme. But the reason why we're having this debate today is in a big part as a result of the violence that was inflicted by Israeli settlers on a Palestinian town in the West Bank. And it was the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who called on Israelis not to take matters into their own hands in that case. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
I am asking, while blood is boiling and tempers high, don't take the law into your own hands. I ask that you allow the IDF and security forces to do their work.
You know, Mark Lefebvre, Benjamin Netanyahu, they're calling on Israelis living in settlements not to take matters into their own hands. But do you have this sense that those living in the settlements feel like they can act with impunity now? They were able to go into this village, and there are reports on the ground suggesting that they weren't stopped by the Israeli military who were there.
Well, it's very strange to hear those statements from Israeli Prime Minister asking the Israelis not to take matters into their hands, when at the same time a minister of the Bibi Netanyahu's government is sitting into an illegal settlement in Eviatar, a settlement which has been closed for military purposes, and a member of the Israeli government is speaking into this illegal settlement at the same time. So he's taking the law in his hands and he's doing something which is forbidden. At the same time, you have the Ministry of Finance who sends a like on Twitter when he sees somebody asking for erasing those villages. So this is the violence, the political violence, and this is the violence on the state, on the side of the Israeli government. This is what the Palestinian people is looking at. Is looking at people who have no confidence in what the Israeli government is saying. Well, the only thing the government Israeli is saying is that it will perpetuate and it will continue to promote and to grow the settlement into the occupied territories. There is nothing on the table as a proposal of a peace process. When you have this meeting organized and by the U.S. State of Department, where somehow the U.S. State of Department comes out with a statement that Israel has agreed to stop building new settlements and new housing, and this is immediately the Israeli government says the contrary. So there is no trust, there is no confidence between the two parties, and there is no hope, there is no alternative. The only thing the Palestinian people see is a population in Israel which is deeply divided on political issues, on the future of Israel as a democratic state. They see hundreds of thousands of Israelis demonstrating in the street, fighting for a democratic state, but with no apparent linkage with the situation, with the perpetration of the occupation. So the Palestinian people have the feeling, and it's not a feeling, it's a reality, that they have been forbidden and forgotten by everybody, even the Israeli democratic parties and the Arab states, and also by the Palestinian authorities, which is slowly vanishing, which has not been legitimated by elections. So what should they do?
Indeed, and go ahead, sir.
Just a word. What we are seeing is chaos, and chaos in Arabic is fawda, just like the Netflix series. This is what we are seeing now, complete chaos.
Yes.
I don't think it's chaos at all.
No, Ode, why don't you think it's chaos?
Because I think, like your guest said earlier, this government is, in its essence, committed to fighting the very existence of the Palestinian people. The fact that these settlers were able to attack Hawara and burn many of its homes to the ground, while members of the Knesset were cheering them on the ground, and while the Israeli occupation forces were providing them with assistance and protection is not happening by chance. And the fact that Palestinians reject this reality is also not a surprise. There is no chaos about this. The only situation that we're in right now is the fact that the Israeli right wing, the Israeli Zionist religious right wing, which is innately racist and anti-Palestinian, has seen that Israel can get away with everything at the international level. It can do these things. It can commit war crimes like expanding settlements. It can, as a matter of policy, exact revenge on Palestinian families, which is another international crime without any consequence. And meanwhile, what is expected of the Palestinians is to show restraint and to commit to protecting the security of their occupier. This is an illogical expectation. And to think that calm and law and order would be restored if this illogical situation is preserved is not just unrealistic. It expects of Palestinians what no other humans would be capable of, which is to welcome their oppressors with open arms. At the moment, what you have at the top, at the helm of power in Israel, is a coalition of people who believe that Palestinians are less human, that they have no human rights, that they are not entitled to freedom, to national rights, that international law does not apply to them, that the U.S. is in their pocket even when they make a fool out of it after a conference like Al-Aqaba, which was not endorsed by any Palestinian political actor worth his or her weight, and at the same time, move ahead with all of these avalanches of judicial changes, of legislation that even has the audacity to think and contemplate imposing the death sentence exclusively on Palestinians, and wonder why they think they can do all of those things. Well, it's because they've been able to do similar things and get away with it. The missing component here is not just providing a political horizon, a promise of a right that is inalienable for the Palestinian people, which is their freedom. The missing component here is, as your guest from Tel Aviv said, a gullible world or world that insists on being gullible and tone deaf, and wants to deal with the reality on the ground with rules and measuring sticks that are different from everywhere else. You can't wish this situation away. You can't issue statements that call for restraint while you're rewarding those who are perpetrating the structured violence.
No, Odeh, your message is heard loud and clear, and I want to bring that to some of our other panelists. Particularly, one thing you just said struck me. You said this Israeli government, sees Palestinians as less human. Alon Pinkas in Tel Aviv, you're a diplomat. You've worked with a number of different Israeli governments. Do you recognize that characterization of this government? Do you agree?
Well, yeah, but okay. Let's broaden the lens here for a second, or the perspective. There is something to be said for clarity. Okay, clarity is bliss in this respect, because for a long time we've been masquerading in terms of Israel's relations with the Palestinians and what Israel really is willing to do and what the Palestinians are willing to do. And here comes an ultra-nationalistic, ultra-religious, theocratic, authoritarian, borderline fascist Jewish supremacy government. And guess what they're doing? They're telling the truth. Well, most of them. Mr. Netanyahu doesn't tend to do that. But his ministers, Minister Smotrich, that his name was mentioned before, who is both the Minister of Treasury and also a minister in the defense ministry, but not the defense ministry. Let's not get into that. Look, in the large sense, in the broader sense, we are living on the 7th day of the 6-day war, and we've been doing that for the better part of the years since 1967. And finally, it is reaching a point where Israel is saying there will not be a Palestinian state. We are free to settle everywhere we want. But Israel is not coming up with a simple silver lining, or if you will, an alternative political solution. There are 14 million people between the Jordan River on the east and the Mediterranean Sea on the west. It is exactly equal, 50% Arab Palestinian and 50% Israeli Jews. If Israel has in mind to annex the entire territory, then this is going to become either a binational state, and if the Palestinians are disenfranchised, it's going to be, although I hate to use this word, apartheid. If Israel does not plan to annex, but to offer them some kind of South African-style Bantustans, that's not gonna work. No Palestinian in his right mind will accept that, and so I just don't see where this converges into what the Americans are, I don't know, naively or negligently calling restraint and calm and order and negotiations and the mutual respect. I just don't see that.
Indeed, sometimes the American language does feel rather far away from the reality on the ground. Gil Michaeli, I mean, the word apartheid was just used there in a possible sort of future context if this reality continues. Do you agree with that? Do you think this is the way this is going?
If this government stays in power, if they continue to do what they are trying to do, what they are doing for the last few weeks, it is inevitable. There's no other option. They are naming the most extremist, racist, sometimes even with a criminal past, ministers. The Knesset became a freak show. They are trying to dismantle the only obstacle, the only thing that the main pillar that made Israel a law-abiding state, which is the Constitutional Court. I mean, it's apartheid will be only one of many bad, horrible things that will happen.
It's quite a statement, isn't it, from a panel of Israelis, two of them saying they believe Israel is heading towards an apartheid. Can I get your view on that as well, Mr. Lefebvre? I mean, maybe you think it's already in an apartheid state. I know there are many Palestinians who would make that argument today.
No, I think there is nothing to add on what was said before. I mean, we share the same analysis of the situation.
Well, perhaps let me ask you this then, sir, if I may. There's been talk of this, the idea of death penalty for Palestinians who are convicted of killing Israeli nationals. Is it your understanding that that would apply to Jewish Israelis who perhaps kill a Israeli of Palestinian origin?
Well, I think we can discuss about those issues, but I think we should concentrate on saying what are the options to get out of this situation.
And indeed, are there any at all? I mean, I don't hear a lot of optimism in the room, I have to say.
At the same time, you see within the border of Israel, you see a demonstration of a political debate which has not been taking place since 1948. I mean, the future of the state of Israel is at stake with what this rightic government intends to do. It intends to destroy the Israeli democracy and the basis on which this state has been created. So this is what is taking place inside the Israeli society at the moment, the society is deeply divided into two equal parts, and this, we don't know the fate of this combat, of this fight. We don't know who will win, but there will not be compromise. I mean, either democracy will be defended and strengthened, or a totalitarian state will take place. There is no place for a compromise between the two. And this is what is at stake in the Israeli society. The occupation and the perpetuation of the occupation is a side effect which has not been given the priority on the political scene since many, many years. So almost all the political parties have accepted that the settlements will, on a slow pace, continue to be developed. So this is not the priority at the moment. Unfortunately, I think the Palestinians will wake up, and that's what they are doing, to remind us that they exist and that they have also dreams to fulfill. But at the same time, for the moment, what is at stake is the deep division of the Israeli society and where the Israeli society will go.
And Noor Odeh, I mean, there's been lots of criticism here of this Israeli government, but let's talk briefly, at least if we can, about the Palestinian government of Mahmoud Abbas. I mean, he's been in power since 2005. His democratic mandate has long evaporated. There's no chance he's planning to hold elections anytime soon, at least on my understanding. Clearly, he's unable to rein in the Palestinian terror groups in places like Jenin, for example. You know, you used to work for the Palestinian Authority. I know that's not what you're doing right now, but how do you view this? I mean, what is the point of Mahmoud Abbas right now if he doesn't have a mandate from the Palestinian street and he isn't able to get very much done?
I think that's an excellent question, but I think it should be also directed towards the international community that is happy to work with the Palestinian Authority that has a legitimacy crisis, rather than to enable Palestinians to exercise their free will and choose their leaders, because this international community would rather deal with this paralyzed status quo than to live with the outcome of Palestinian ballots. We saw that in 2021 when the world didn't really push Israel to lift its veto on Palestinians in Jerusalem holding elections, when it didn't really pressure Mahmoud Abbas into having elections in 2021. But I have to say, it's not just about the Palestinian Authority, which, like I said, is facing a very serious legitimacy crisis. It's about the expectations that the world has of Palestinians, that they must play the game according to rigged rules that makes their freedom contingent upon proving, docile enough and domesticated enough and willing to carry out the agenda of the occupier rather than answer the needs of the Palestinian people. That's been part, the elephant in the Palestinian room, at least for a very, very long time. And it's time to have that conversation internally. It's time to ask the hard questions about what is the raison d'etre of the Palestinian government, any Palestinian government, headed by Mahmoud Abbas or anybody else. Is it to make the international community happy? Is it to make the Israeli occupier happy? Or is it to see this through, to protect the Palestinian people and their rights, and to ensure that they have a state of their own? And I think that not everybody is on the same page in that sense when it comes to international support and international actors.
Gil Mikhaeli, what do you make of that?
I just want to remind that in 2005, Israel tried a pilot project by retreating from Gaza. There were elections later. Israel was reluctant to allow these elections. There were pressure from the United States. There were elections. Hamas won in Gaza, and the project failed. And I think one of the reasons, and I'm not trying to diminish the responsibility on the current Israeli government or on those who voted for it, or all of us who are Israeli citizens, we are all responsible, even if we didn't vote for them. But if Israel radicalized, it is because for many Israelis, after the failure of the withdrawal from Lebanon and the failure of the Gaza project, there was no other option.
You're making my point.
Forgive me, can I just ask you, Noor Odeh, I'll come to you in just a moment on that, but are you suggesting it was a failure in Gaza because the Palestinians elected somebody who you don't like? I mean, it was democratic, wasn't it?
Yes, but the first thing that Hamas did when it got to power was to launch the operation that ended with the kidnapping of a soldier, that created the situation that started the war in Lebanon in July, August 2006, that jeopardized and the political perspective of the government. I mean, I don't want to go through the whole thing.
But you're saying
when you're talking to 8 or 9 million people, you don't do a seminar in Sciences Po, okay? For them, they told them for years, if we just go out from this territory, we let them live their lives, everything will be all right. This is not what happened. Okay, this is not what happened. So we can explain that it was a negotiation, and then this and that. But globally, Palestinian elections in 2006 gave a very bad result. Israeli going out of Lebanon, going out of Gaza, gave very, very bad results.
Okay.
So.
I want to bring Noor O'Day on
sure,
this briefly if I can, because she's shaking her head behind us. We'll try to bring everybody in if we can.
Yeah.
Noor O'Day, let's go to you briefly if we can on this, because there's lots that we have to get through.
Well, like I said, Gil was making my point. You can't expect, first of all, elections for Palestinians is not something that Israel can or should have the power to permit or not. It's a right that we are being deprived of. But Israel didn't just withdraw from Gaza and allow Palestinians to rule themselves. It maintained a siege that it controls every aspect of life in Gaza. And Palestinians, when they voted across the occupied West Bank, including Jerusalem and Gaza. So the results weren't only a consequence of voters in Gaza. I think it's very problematic to paint a picture where you directly or indirectly explain, contextualize, or even give credence to the idea that Israel has the right to occupy because it doesn't know what the consequences will be when Palestinians are on their own. That's not a decision that Israel or anybody else should be making. And that's not the way to move forward. Palestinians are one political entity, one people. To say that Israel withdrew from Gaza while continuing to build and steal land in the West Bank, that's the other half of the story. And so leaving Gaza doesn't solve anything. Of course it doesn't solve anything, because it didn't result in Palestinian freedom or statehood, because there is no political horizon, and because those in power in Israel continue to believe that Palestinians must prove they're worthy of their right to be free by acting according to an Israeli agenda, which won't happen, no matter who's in power in Palestine.
And perhaps that is why we're having conversations now about whether or not we're looking towards a third intifada. What do you think, sir?
Well, I think at the moment, I mean, it has been said before, I mean, hope and trust have vanished on both sides, in both camps. And I think as an Israeli who has fought all his life against occupation and in favor of a peace process, I'm also tired to listen constantly to the other side, who is very good and for some reasonable reasons good at blaming us, without looking for also maybe points to be criticized inside the Palestinian camp. I will just give you an example. Okay. As a member of the peace camp, I always fought for a solution of two states, two separate states. But when, during the second intifada, the terrorist attacks took place within the 67 borders, where coffee shops, hotels, civilians were the targets of attacks within the recognized Israeli borders, what is the signal which was sent by the nationalist camp? The signal which was sent was that we do not accept Israelis wherever they are, wherever they live. So we don't differentiate between the occupied territories since 1967 and the recognized borders of 1948. Therefore, the signal was very clear, and this is the way it was understood by most of the Israeli population.
But if
the Palestinian national camp does not fight for liberation of the occupied territories. If the Palestinian camp fights for the liberation of total Palestine. So therefore, it is very difficult for us to convince an Israeli that on the Palestinian side, there is a real willingness for a compromise. We don't see really a clear political statement only from a minor section of the Palestinian political scene that they are really ready for a serious compromise. So the fault and the responsibility has to be looked at on both sides.
And I don't think we have time right now to go back to Nourodeh for a response on that. But what I was just thinking as you were speaking is I suppose there is a distinction between attacks during the second intifada, which did target Israelis in cafes in Tel Aviv, for example, and perhaps what we're looking at today, which seems to be, at least in the last week, attacks on settlers in the West Bank. And I wonder if we can bring in Elon Pinkas on that. So we haven't heard from you in a while. The third intifada is a phrase that's been thrown around quite a bit. Do you think we're there? Are we nearly there?
There are various scenarios. One of them is a third intifada, which will be very different than the previous two, which were different compared to each other to begin with. That's one scenario. There's another scenario that's very troubling, and that is the implosion, dissolution, or voluntary disintegration of the Palestinian Authority, which legally, politically, and practically would make Israel the sovereign, meaning the full-fledged occupier in charge of policing and health and education and traffic and garbage collection and what have you. What the Palestinians should not expect is the international community to go back to a 90s mindset of taking care of them. The world is now busy with Ukraine and Russia, possibly in the next few years, with China. But because you complained earlier that everyone is pessimistic, and I don't want you to feel bad about hosting this show, I'm slightly optimistic about this because in the end, with all the lunacy, the chaotic extremism that is going on, and the agents of chaos on both sides, there's a reality that's probably stronger than both sides. And the reality is primarily demographic, and that demographic will dictate a division into two sovereign units. Now, the modalities of that, 2 states, 3 states, a Jordanian Palestinian Federation, an interim Palestinian state, policed, governed, and managed by NATO or by the UN, I don't know. There are various ideas being around, but the idea that the status quo is going to continue, that the Israeli public, which is growing increasingly impatient, and the Palestinians who are suffering from their extremists as well as a nation and as a community, and at some point even the world will tolerate this ongoing third intifada, as you call it. It just seems unlikely, which is why I am cautiously, slightly, somehow, kind of, sort of optimistic.
I think in this region we'll take even a little bit of cautious optimism. So thank you very much for providing us a slice of it, an image of it, Mr. Pinkas. Can I bring you in on that, Gil Michaeli? Do you have any optimism right now? I mean, earlier you used the word apartheid. I imagine the way you feel then rather far away from the picture that was just painted.
I know Alon for more than 50 years, and in our town, everyone knew him as an incurable optimistic.
So that's a no then. Well, let me ask you this then. There was that question raised by him there about demographics and the kind of demographic reality. One of those realities is that, in general, Muslims in that part of the world have more children than Jewish Israelis do. There will be, in the coming decades, more Muslim Palestinians than Jewish Israelis if the demographic trends continue in the way they are now. What does that mean for the practical, reality of Israel? We were hearing there even the idea of a third state solution. I mean, what do you think when you listen to all of that?
If we were talking about the Roman Empire and about centuries of evolution, why not? But I remember myself when I was 15, 16, 17, or even later, there were already projections of demographics. We were supposed to be a minority in the 90s and then in the 2000 and then in 2000. Alon is right, but it's a tectonic movement. I mean, Africa was America and Africa.
And when you say he's right, you mean that you do believe there will be two states that will emerge at some point? Is that a picture that seems plausible to you?
I believe that the tectonic movement is demographic.
Okay.
But I mean, it's 40, 50, 100 years. We have a problem tonight, tomorrow, in a year, in 2 years, 3 years. And here the problem is of completely different nature. And my hope is that those who are demonstrating every Saturday, those who are doing everything that they can within the law in order to stop this crazy government, I believe that they can win. And this is why I am a little bit optimistic.
All right, a little bit of optimism from you there. We'll certainly take that in this programme. I want to pick up on...
Yes, talking about demographic.
Yes. Briefly, sir, if you can.
Yes. When you look at the birth rate over the various population in this area over the last 10 years, you look, for example, at the birth rate among the Palestinians, the Arab minority within Israel.
Yeah.
Their birth rate has decreased and is comparable to the birth rate of Israeli secular families. The highest birth rate is among the religious and ultra-Orthodox Israelis. And if you talk about demographic trends, within the next 10 to 20 years, the secular population in Israel will be less than the religious and ultra-Orthodox population. So this is a demographic trend which has to be taken into account if you look at the future of the political scene in Israel. So basically, with the actual birth rate, the population in Israel will be more and more religious and right-wing.
And perhaps with that more extreme. Is that
exactly.
the fear that you're painting?
Exactly.
And
the last point I wanted to add is that this far-right Israeli government has been elected on security, to bring more security to the Israeli people. This is exactly the contrary which is taking place. Okay, the former government had a policy of restraint, and so somehow the attacks and the terrorist attacks were limited. This government has been elected for more security, and there is less security. This, among other things, I hope they
will just find someone to blame.
Okay, they will find someone, but the Israeli electors are more clever than the Israeli government.
I hope so.
I don't think they will accept any longer this type of game and argument.
Well, let's make sure we get the Palestinian perspective if we can now before we end the programme. Noor O'Day is still with us from Ramallah, and I'm going to quote a rather controversial columnist. It's Thomas Friedman, who writes for the New York Times, and he published an article today. He said, we're experiencing now a Palestinian intifada and at the same time a settler intifada. Would you agree with that there's been this sort of almost a mimicking on the settler far right of Israel by some of the tactics used by Palestinians, and we're seeing this sort of playing off against each other, and that's what we saw in Hawara a few days ago?
Well, before I get to Thomas Friedman, I just want to clarify that Palestinians are not just Muslims, and we don't like to measure the possibility of achieving rights by how many children we have, Christian or Muslim. Having said that, Thomas Friedman is known for a lot of things, including reaching wrong conclusions, and this is one of them. There is no parity here, and I don't think that we can say that Israeli settlers are borrowing from the Palestinian playbook. Palestinians didn't go on pogroms against Israeli towns and burned many of their homes to their ground, and also Palestinians are living in their homes while these settlers are committing a war crime by being present in those settlements. Having said that, I think this is the picture that is convenient to paint, and it's an extremely dangerous one, because if we think of this, if we reduce what is happening to communities being pitted against one another and the Israeli army kind of trying to bring law and order, then we're really missing the point. This is a situation of colonial occupation. of a people under occupation that do not want to be governed by a foreign country, and the occupier being run by those settlers and their agenda, those settlers feeling emboldened, knowing that they can burn Palestinian homes and families and get away with it because they are in power and because they have paid no consequence. And the minute these constituents of this government feel a pinch, feel that there will be consequences, that is the only way they will reassess this downward spiral, this train wreck that is happening before our eyes.
Thank you very much indeed. We're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Alon Pincus as well for joining us live from Tel Aviv. Gehael Mihaly with me here in the studio, and Mark Lefebvre as well. Thanks to all four of you. Thanks to you as well, our viewers, for watching the France 24 debate on the situation in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. I've been Nadia Massi, and this is The Debate. Thanks for watching.